Breaking Bread is brought to you by North York Community House, an organization that builds strong, resilient, and inclusive communities in Northwest Toronto.
It's time for a shift. This is the shift. Big change, big things in the phase. Yeah. Big change, big things in the phase. Yeah.
My name is Sage Bankasingh, and I'll be your host for this episode of Breaking Bread, Stories of Black Communities in Transition. Our limited podcast series seeks to take a deeper dive into redevelopment and uncover the truth about this phenomenon in the city of Toronto. Throughout this journey, we'll be speaking to residents, community leaders, and industry experts to shed light on the experiences of those living through these major transitions, providing further insight into the real consequences of urban redevelopment. This is episode 11 of Breaking Bread, Stories of Black Communities in Transition.
Tired of the self-hurt, so I put in that. Yeah, this is the shift. Big change, big things in the phase. Yeah, big change, big things in the phase.
This is the final episode of Breaking Bread, and today we're joined by Kumsa Baker from the Toronto Community Benefits Network. Today we'll be discussing the work that TCBN does and the role community benefits agreements play in redevelopment projects across the city. Perfect. So, Kumsa, thank you so much for joining us today. We're just going to jump right in. So could you please introduce yourself, give us a little background on what you do and your work or job in the industry?
So my name is Kumsa Baker. I'm with an organization called the Toronto Community Benefits Network, and I work there as a Director of Community Engagement and Campaigns. Okay. And about myself, I grew up in the city of Toronto. I really love the city, and I've also really seen a lot of a change in the recent decade as I've grown up, and so my work at the Toronto Community Benefits Network is I feel very passionate about the work that I do with the organization, because I really I'm able to help support my community in being able to benefit from all this redevelopment and wealth that's being created in our city, and really supporting a lot of youth and accessing good jobs in our city as well.
That's really, really good. And you said you worked for the Toronto Community Benefits Network, TCBN. Can you tell me a little bit more about the organization and what you guys do there?
Yeah, so the Toronto Community Benefits Network, we actually turned 10 years old this year in March of 2024.
Okay, congratulations. That's a big milestone.
Yeah, thank you. And so over the last 10 years, the Toronto Community Benefits Network has grown into a 120 member network organization. So we're a membership-based organization, including community groups, community organizations, grassroots groups, agencies, workforce development organizations, employment service providers, labor unions and labor groups, as well as social enterprises. And so we have 120 member organizations. And so as a network, what we're really focused on is really making sure that, as part of all this redevelopment of communities, whether it's, new public infrastructure like transit that's being built across the city, or, the redevelopment of TCHC communities, or, new housing that's coming into our city, we really want to make sure that the local community really benefits from those opportunities. And historically, we know that, Black, Indigenous, and racialized communities haven't been able to really benefit from opportunities, whether it's in construction or business development, contract opportunities through procurement, and other benefits that we know are really important. And so as an organization, we focus on 5 main areas. And so the first one is really looking at what we call good jobs and inclusive local economic development. And so when we see the city being redeveloped, we know that there's a lot of opportunities that come to the community when it comes to the construction of all these new projects, right? Right now we have, billions of dollars that are being invested in our city, in building new public infrastructure, building new housing. And, that's a really great opportunity to have, a pathway into an apprenticeship, for example. And we know for an apprenticeship program, you start at a really great wage, you have access to benefits, you have access to a pension. And by the time you complete your apprenticeship, you actually are able to become a journey person, and at a journey person rate, I think those are really great jobs that, historically our communities haven't really benefited from or haven't had access to. And so that's some of the work that we do, with both the unions, but also employers, when we look at, the type of jobs that are being created, and how can we make sure that we have local pathways and programs and initiatives to help both educate our community, because I know sometimes construction may not be like the first choice of option for people who are looking for what they want to do in the future. But we know that, in Ontario, there's like such a skill shortage, and we always hear that, we need more tradespeople, and we know those are also good jobs. And so how do we connect our community and educate them that these opportunities are out there? Yeah. And then once they're interested, what are the programs, what are the supports that we can provide them, and also the pathways to connect to the union or to connect into it with an employer. And so that's one of the approaches that we take. Another piece also, we know that not everyone's interested in construction. And so another pathway that we also have is what's called professional, administrative, and technical roles. Short form is PAT. And so we support a lot of graduates from different whether it's college or university programs, a lot of newcomers who are coming to Canada that have skills, whether they're engineers back home but may need Canadian experience, or other types of skills like that. And we know that those are also jobs that are in demand as well, because for every person that's working on a construction site, there's also people that are working, in the office, doing the HR, doing the engineering, doing the project management, right? And so we've also been able to create pathways for new graduates, newcomers that are coming to Canada, to help support them into those type of roles. And so we create, whether it's internship programs or partnerships with employers to hire them on, especially on some of these large scale infrastructure projects like the new transit projects that are happening across the city. So that's kind of the first area around more like workforce development. Yeah. The second area that we focus a lot as well is on like procurement opportunities, right? So we know that, we also have a lot of businesses, especially within the Black community. And one of the barriers that we know is access to procurement opportunities. And, whether it's the government or employers or contractors, we know that a lot of times they need to work with smaller businesses to help provide the type of goods or services that they need. Just on an annual basis, that, the city of Toronto spends, billions of dollars just doing procurement. But how much of that goes towards Black businesses in our communities? I don't think, like, we've been trying to get them to, share stats in terms of like how much of contract opportunities actually go to the Black community. And we're just starting to get some more of that reporting completed. But we want to support Black businesses in accessing procurement opportunities, so that they can grow their businesses and also survive. And one of the great partnerships that we've actually had over the last few years is in 2021 was we helped to incubate what's called the Afro-Canadian Contractors Association. Short form is called ACA. And so this is an association of actually Black contractors across Canada. So it is a national organization. And what they identified was that we have so many small Black contractors, and for some of the opportunities that are out there, you need a bigger organization, right? And so how do we help some of the smaller businesses scale up their businesses to maybe bid on some of these different contract opportunities, on all these different construction projects? Or for those who are interested in starting their own company, what are some programs and initiatives that we can put in place to also make sure that there's entrepreneurship and business development opportunities for those who are interested in starting their own companies in construction. And we know that that can also be another great way of building capacity in our community. And we know that those contractors can also hire from our community as well. So it's also building a really sustainable pathway, both not only to creating good jobs in our community, but also entrepreneurs and business people that who hopefully can scale up and to really be successful in future years. Okay. And so that's the second area. The third area is I'll be a little bit higher level with this one, but really looking at what's called neighborhood improvements. And so we know that in every community that may look different, and so that's where a lot of the work that I do is really supporting a lot of engagement with communities to really understand, like, as part of redevelopment of your community, what are the things that you need to make sure that your community thrives? For some of the projects, or some of the neighborhoods, one of the things that we've heard is, people want access to childcare. When we talk about employment, one of the big barriers that people always share is that, employment's great, but, childcare is really expensive, or I'm unable to find childcare in my community, or I have to travel far distances to find accessible or affordable childcare. And so we know that's one of the huge barriers. So if the community is being redeveloped, how do you make sure that there's spaces like childcare, for people in the community to make sure that they have that access. Also things like community spaces or recreation spaces, sometimes for, residents or grassroots groups or organizations, it's really hard to find space to even hold a meeting, right? And so really thinking about, okay, like if this whole neighborhood's going to be redeveloped, if there's going to be new spaces created, could there be opportunities for community spaces, for grassroots organizations or for residents to be able to meet or to have events, etc. The last one I'll maybe touch on is also affordable housing. We know that right now there's a huge affordability crisis in our city. Affordable housing is on the top of mind for a lot of people.
Yeah.
If you're a young person or someone that is new to Canada, it's really hard to be able to even think about affording to own a home in the long term. And so, as part of the redevelopment of communities, how do we make sure that we're not just maintaining the existing affordable housing, but how do we actually build more affordable housing in these communities? And so that takes a lot of leadership from government, working with developers, working with communities. And from an advocacy approach, we also want to make sure that communities are engaged and participating when those processes happen, when they do consultations, so that their voices can be heard in terms of what those priorities in their neighborhood are, and to make sure that those decision makers know that these are the local community priorities. We also do a lot of work on environment and sustainability. We know that we're also in a climate crisis. We also know that buildings actually are 40% of all emissions in our city of Toronto come from buildings. And so as we're redeveloping all these communities, building new buildings, how do we make sure that those buildings are sustainable, right? So that we can actually reduce our emissions, recognizing that buildings are a huge factor in how in emissions in our city of Toronto. And so we really want to make sure that we're building communities for the future that are sustainable, that are using new technologies to make sure that people are also living in a sustainable way in the longer term. And also, other environmental initiatives that people in the community may want to have, like, food justice programs, initiatives that, can make sure that, communities can lead their own food security programs or initiatives, growing food, and we know that's also something that we've heard a lot from communities in making sure there's still access to those green spaces in their communities so that they can have these type of programs and initiatives. And then the last area, which I think is probably the most important, and we'll probably talk a little bit more, is monitoring and accountability, right? And community oversight, right? We want to make sure that through community benefit agreements, we can make sure that, whenever a developer is coming in to build a new project, that these commitments are made upfront in a signed agreement. And so really, one of the things that really brings all of those priorities together is really making sure that before a project start, there's an agreement in place to make sure that there's that level of transparency where communities know exactly how they'll benefit from the project, and that those agreements can be made public, so that there's also an opportunity to hold those developers accountable to those commitments or promises that they make to the community.
Thank you for that. That was a very comprehensive answer. Before we get into community benefit agreements, I was just wondering, maybe for you specifically in the work that you do with TCBN, but also TCBN as a whole, like what areas of the city do you work in? What communities do you work in? And maybe a little bit about how these communities are chosen. Like, how do you guys go about seeking out, neighborhood improvement areas?
Yeah, because we're membership based, a lot of our members are in different neighborhoods across the city. So I would say pretty much right now we're pretty spread out across the city. Like, we have 120 member organizations. Okay. So and so that's where our focus is really working with our member organizations and in their neighborhoods that they're located. We recognize that they, doing the work in the community as an organization or as a community group or as a service provider, we know that they know their community best. And so that's some of the work that I do, is in terms of helping to build the capacity of our memberships to also support the engagement of communities. And so some of the communities that we work in, including initially we did a lot of work along the different transit corridors, so along Eglinton. So when TCBN started in 2015, the first sort of big project was the Eglinton Crosstown LRT. And so we felt it was really important that we engaged all those communities that were going to be impacted by the Eglinton Crosstown LRT project in really making sure that they understood, these are new investments that are coming into our community, and how do we make sure that we have our share of the opportunities? How do we make sure we have a community benefits agreement in place? And from there, we've also, done some really great work along Finch with the Finch West LRT. And then we've also done some work also at a neighborhood level. So everywhere from South Etobicoke to not far from here at Downsview, which is undergoing a new 30-year redevelopment plan to redevelop the whole Downsview area now that the Bombardier aerospace facility is leaving. And then all the way further out east, we do a lot of work in revitalization communities like Lawrence Heights and Regent Park. We've also done some work also in Scarborough, across actually Scarborough, with new infrastructure and housing developments like neighborhoods like the Golden Mile, where there's a lot of new private developments happening. And so our work is neighborhood based, but across the city of Toronto. We also, our programs are open to anyone from across the city of Toronto, and I'll talk a little bit about them a bit later as well.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Okay, so switching gears a little bit, you mentioned community benefit agreements. I was just wondering what they are, how do they work, and why are they important?
Yeah, so community benefit agreements are, I would say, probably a newer concept in Canada. However, they've been used, especially in the U.S., for many years, going back decades. So there's a lot of learning that we've actually taken from some of the work and experiences that many major cities in the U.S. who have undergone similar type of challenges with redevelopment and urban renewal of their cities. There's also a lot of history with Indigenous communities through what's called impact benefit agreements, where there's these large resource development projects that come to their communities, and they've been able to negotiate what's called impact benefit agreements. So essentially what a community benefits agreement is it's an agreement that's signed either between a community and a developer, or a community, a city and a developer, or sometimes even just a city and a developer. And what this agreement outlines is how, as part of the development project, so usually these are negotiated before a development project begins, and really what it outlines is how exactly the developers will be committing to benefit the community as part of this development project. It could be anywhere from during just the construction of the project, or it can also extend beyond in terms of the operations of the project, etc. And so these agreements are usually these agreements are informed by community priorities, and so that's where a lot of the work that I do is really going to communities and really understanding what are their priorities, because we want to really make sure that these agreements reflect the needs of the local communities. Every agreement is going to look different. There's not one community benefit agreement that looks the same, because in each neighborhood, in each community, and depending also on the type of project, the commitments and the benefits may look a little bit different as well. But essentially, what we really understood was that we needed to make sure that, as part of the redevelopment of our communities, like it was not enough just to have promises made, but we actually wanted to have like agreements that can actually outline this in an accountable and transparent way. And so the idea of a community benefits agreement is sort of that way of making sure that there's that level of transparency, but also a way for communities to hold developers and governments accountable to say that, this is, exactly the benefits that you've committed to, that we're going to be monitoring that over time to make sure that you fulfill and achieve those commitments and targets that you've set in your agreement. Typically, these agreements are project specific. So each project will have a separate community benefits agreement. It can include a wide range of things. I mentioned earlier some of the things that we really focus on as part of community benefit agreements. So whether it's around good jobs, inclusive local economic opportunities, whether it's during the construction, but also in the long term. Also looking at professional career opportunities, social procurement opportunities, also like neighborhood improvements, which could look different from neighborhood to neighborhood. Also environmental sustainability and environmental protections, and also really making sure that there's a process of how those outcomes will be reported over time. And so typically what we'll require as part of these agreements is that they actually produce annual reports. And so on an annual basis, communities can receive this report that's made public so that you can actually like see what the initial commitments were, but also how they're doing in terms of those targets that they've set in those agreements. There's also what we call a community benefits working group, right? Okay. So we don't just sign this agreement and then sort of leave and get the annual reports and hopefully that they've achieved it. We actually set up a working group that includes residents of those of the community, so that every few months there's a meeting where the developer or the government will be comes to the table, shares any updates, they'll share any challenges. There may be specific initiatives that may also be undertaken to make sure that those commitments are fulfilled. And so it really creates a process to ensure that communities are at the table monitoring and really holding governments and developers accountable. And so one of the things that also are part of these agreements is also a plan. And so that's also a way of communities really helping to inform how they want to see those community benefit agreements, those commitments actually being implemented. And we know it's really important to have a plan so that there's that level of transparency, right? So when we talk about jobs and economic opportunities, we actually want to see a plan for that, right? Yeah. What are you going to be doing in the community? Are you going to be doing training programs? Are you going to be offering career fairs or job fairs? How are you going to be making sure that these opportunities are made available in the community? So are you going to have a website where people in the community can actually go and access all these are all the jobs that are as part of the project, and this is how you can apply. This is how you can get support if you need any training or supports, etc. And so similarly with all these different initiatives as part of the community benefits agreement, that's some of the role that TCBN plays, right? Because we do have some of that expertise to work with developers and to work with governments on these large scale projects to make sure that those plans are actually developed, and so that we can actually see those real pathways into those opportunities for communities, and not just sort of having an agreement that just sort of sits on its own.
Interesting. Okay, so this is obviously a podcast about redevelopment, and specifically how it affects Black communities. How do these agreements relate to redevelopment communities? And more specifically, I guess, can you give an example of a redevelopment community that developed a community benefits agreement and the outcomes of that? I know it's hard to say the outcomes because it's like a long-term thing to kind of hold people accountable and make sure that that plan's actually being implemented in the community. But yeah, an example of a redevelopment community and a CBA, and how, like, what the kind of outcome and how that looked in the community, and what it's done for the residents.
Yeah, like I probably want to talk about we definitely have newer community benefit agreements that are sort of getting off the ground, and not a lot of outcomes to share right now because the projects are just starting. But maybe I'll talk about that first project that I mentioned, the Eglinton Cross and LRT, which I'm crossing my fingers. Hopefully it will be open soon. Hopefully,
fingers crossed. We'll see. They keep on pushing back the date, but hopefully it will.
Yeah, and so that was the first of its kind in Ontario. In 2014, the Toronto Community Benefits Network, after doing a lot of that mobilizing in the local community, we were able to sign what's called a community benefits framework with Metrolinx, and so it's the first of its kind in Ontario, which really made sure that as part of the Eglinton Cross and LRT project, that there would be specific pathways for local and equity deserving groups to have pathways into those jobs. We know that along Eglinton, and especially in communities like Little Jamaica, there's a high proportion of Black people that live in the community, that have businesses in the community, and we've seen over time the significant impacts that these large scale transit infrastructure projects could have on communities like Little Jamaica, where many businesses have been impacted. And now have unfortunately had to close because of all the disruption from construction. And so with the community benefits framework that was negotiated as part of the project, what we've been able to do is have a few different initiatives that we've been able to help support, including an apprenticeship pathway, also a professional administrative and technical program, as well as a procurement program, and so those were, I would say, the three key elements that were part of the community benefits framework. In terms of some of the outcomes from that project, so to date, what we've seen is that so through the community benefits plan that was established for the project, there was 202 placements into apprenticeship opportunities. So these are individuals that have come directly from the local community into apprenticeship opportunities. Also for the professional, administrative, and technical roles, we've seen over 250 placements into those positions.
Oh, wow.
There's also been a focus on a local spending plan, so really supporting local businesses. And we see here that they've been able to spend close to $15 million
Oh, wow.
in purchasing from some of the local businesses. And given that we have social enterprises in our network as well, they've also been able to spend over $1 million in contract opportunities for social enterprises. There's also been some neighborhood improvements. One of the big priorities for the community in Mount Dennis was that they wanted to see this old Kodak building be preserved, because the initial plan was that they were going to demolish this really old historic building in their community. And so they had really pushed to make sure that that building not only was going to be maintained but actually restored. And so that building is actually now the new station for what's called the Mount Dennis station. And there's one of the great things also is that on the second and third floor, they've also repurposed it into some sort of offices and community spaces. And so we're hoping that could also provide a direct benefit to the community in the long term. And so that project is currently wrapping up. But what we've also been wanting to see is that now that the construction is over and now the operations are coming, we also want to make sure that our communities benefit from the operations. They're going to need people to maintain the trains. They're going to need people to operate the trains. And so we're also looking at, ways that we can work with like TTC or, the operators of these new transit projects to make sure that there are also pathways for local communities to benefit in the long term as well. And so that's just one example of a project where, we've seen, outcomes. That was the first of its kind. And so what we're hoping is that with newer projects that are coming to our city, we actually have 4 new transit projects that we can have similar programs in place that can really make sure that local communities that are being impacted can actually benefit from those opportunities. At the TCBN, what we've also done is we've actually customized our own outreach to make sure that our focus is also mainly on the Black community. And so through that, in 2017, what we actually started was called a Black Youth Mentorship Program, specifically for Black youth in construction trades. And so what that allows us to do is actually go into communities and specifically focus on supporting Black youth, because we know historically Black people have been underrepresented, especially in the construction sector. And so with that program, we're able to do the outreach, we're able to support the youth in understanding more about the trades. We connect them to a mentor, and then we also make sure that they're equipped before they go into the workplace with the skills, with the safety certificates, also with any supports that they need around like having a toolkit, having boots, having a hard hat, so that once they're actually on the job site, they're ready to succeed. And then through the mentorship program, having a mentor, someone that looks like them, that's already in the construction industry, help support their pathway so that they can actually be successful in the long term, has also been something that we've seen that's been really impactful. So that's another way of how we've been able to both create opportunities for local communities, but also make sure that we have customized programs specifically for Black youth to be able to have a pathway into the construction sector and also succeed in the long term.
Your example of using Little Jamaica and the Eglinton West Metrolinx Crosstown project is really, really good, just because it's been such a long project. And I feel like it's impacted the community in so many different ways that we talk about sometimes, but a lot of it is taboo as well. So it's nice to see that you guys had tangible benefits that came and benefited the community with that project. Thank you. That was a great answer and very insightful for me as well. So I guess for my last question, if someone is looking to become a member and wants to start offering support to their community, what does that process look like, and how can they get involved with the TCBN if they're looking for some extra support?
Yeah, definitely. Reach out to us. We have a website, communitybenefits.ca, which is more where you can reach out to us and indicate your interest in becoming a member or wanting to set up a meeting with us to see how we can support your community. We also have the nextgenbuilders.ca. So if you're an individual that is interested in getting into the construction sector, we also have nextgenbuilders.ca as a really great resources where you can sign up for a mentorship program. At nextgenbuilders.ca, you'll also see a link to the Black Youth Academy, which I mentioned a little bit earlier as specific programs focused on supporting Black youth into construction. And also, if you're looking for a job in the construction sector, one of the great resources that we've also set up is what's called Employer Portal, which is what we've actually done is we have an employer liaison that connects with all these big construction employers to look at different opportunities that they're looking to hire for. And so we actually create a portal where we pull all those jobs together and to make them available to the community. And so if you're someone that's interested, you can go into employerportal.ca. You can also upload your resume. You can book a one-on-one session with our employer liaison if you need support with upgrading your resume. And then we also are able to match you with employers that are looking for employees. And so we've actually been able to grow that into actually having a couple times a year. What we'll do is a big career fair. Right now, we're really focusing on green careers because we know that's the opportunities of the future, and we know that a lot of these jobs in the construction sector are green jobs because they're either new buildings that are being built with sustainable methods, or they're also older buildings that are being retrofitted to make sure that there's upkeep. And so we do an annual Green Build Career Fair. Typically it's in February, so if that's something that you're interested in as well, we can if you're connected to employerportal.ca, you'll also get that opportunity to meet employers directly one-on-one. And so we've done it 2 years. The first year we had about 1,000 people.
Oh, wow,
This just past February we had about 1,500 people, and so it continues to grow, and we bring more employers on board. And also there's unions that are also have tables, and also other pre-apprenticeship training programs, and also other employment programs that are available in the community as a resource. And so those are different ways that you can also connect with us at the TCBN.
Okay, so lastly, do you have anything else to add to anything that you said? Anything important you want to flag?
Yeah, I would say just as probably as more personal note, but as someone that's grown up in the city, I've really seen Toronto being a global city, the financial capital of Canada. It really hurts to see the amount of inequality that we have in our city, and especially within the Black community, where a lot of people are really struggling to make ends meet in our city. A lot of my friends they've gone through school, they've gotten post-secondary degrees, whether it's in college or university, but it's just been really hard to find an opportunity to contribute in your community or to have a good job in the city, and so that's something that I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done, and I think we need governments to better support our community. We need to break down some of the barriers that are in place, especially when it comes to discrimination and racism that put up a lot of challenges for especially Black people to access good jobs in our city. And I would say also the redevelopment that's happening in our city is not in the traditional downtown core. A lot of the development now that we're seeing is in the inner suburbs, where there are a lot of low-income communities, where there is such a great diversity of people, and what's happening right now is that people are actually starting to get displaced because investors and speculators are coming in and seeing that our communities are a really great opportunity to make an investment off of, right? And so I think it's really important that people get involved in your community to make sure that that these type of things are not happening, to be proactive before these new projects come in, to make sure that you have a say in the process, also to hold governments accountable as well, because I think governments also have a role to play in terms of allowing for these type of activities to happen, whether it's around displacement of tenants, redevelopment of communities that doesn't include opportunities for community benefits or affordable housing, even home ownership. It's become such a big challenge to own a home, right? And so with all this redevelopment happening, could there be rent to own programs that can make sure that people have a pathway to home ownership, especially for the Black community. And so I would say it's if not now, then probably never, because people are just gonna get pushed out of the city.
Yep.
And we're already seeing a lot of that happening, right? And so my maybe final words would be get involved in your community. Reach out to TCBN if you need support in terms of how to start to organize. But it's really important that you're really involved and in the know in terms of what's happening here in the community before it's too late, and to also make sure that you make sure that your priorities are at the table when these important decisions are being made.
This is the shift. Big change, big things in a phase. Yeah. Big change, big things in a phase. Yeah. Big change, big things in a phase. Yeah. A new phase. Yeah. This is the shift. Vibrations been raised. New friends.
This podcast is brought to you by North York Community House. North York Community House builds strong, resilient, and inclusive communities in Northwest Toronto. We help children, youth, parents, and seniors become active, engaged citizens who lead positive change in their neighborhoods. Find us at nych.ca.